Okay, we're here. B104, state of the CDN market. Before I begin, I always like to do a bit of a straw poll to see who's in the audience. So those of you who are in the microservices one, I'm going to repeat that now. So who here's engineering and dev? There's a half a hand up in the corner there. And there's a few more hands appearing, okay. And who here's on business strategy, technical architecture, analysts, and people outside of the core streaming space? Okay. So it looks like we've got an architecture lean on the flavour of our answers, chaps. Okay, so my name's Don Robinson. I've been writing for Streaming Media magazine since 2002. I ran a CDN of my own between 2001 and 2009, which was all very focused on IP multicast. And if you want to hear more about that story, I'm talking about 31 years of IP multicasting in telco networks tomorrow in one of the sessions. Have a look on the program for multicast. But I've been fascinated in the CDN space since the late 90s and so on, and I've watched it evolve. I've written a book on the subject, but I don't really know even a tiny drop compared with my panelists here. So before we start, let's just get a quick intro from each of the panelists. If I could start with you, Matt, if you could just give us a quick intro about your background and what you're doing at the moment.
Hi everybody, I'm Matt Smith. I am the head of CDN Strategy for Comcast Technology Solutions. We take Comcast technology and use it to help our customers build the underpinnings, the plumbing, if you will, for the D2C live linear channels that they deliver to their customers. And we do that globally. It's a B2B business.
George.
My name is George Bokuchava. I'm CEO of Tulix Systems company out of Atlanta, Georgia. We have our own CDN solution. We're also building custom CDN solutions for our customers, as well as we have a complete OTT solution, and obviously CDN is a part of it. So anything A to Z, starting from the signal acquisition to building mobile apps and everything in between, this is what we do. And again, CDN is a big component, obviously, of the whole solution. Thank you.
Perfect. Neil.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Neil Glazebrook, and I'm product management at Limelight Networks, and I have responsibility for core content delivery, the content delivery engine, if you will, all of the software that's involved in core delivery services, edge compute, and all of the sort of the enablement services around that. I've been involved with the CDN industry for about 8 years, and every year I come back to these sorts of events, and I'm amazed at how the industry continues to grow. More and more people involved in the ecosystem, and it's a great opportunity to mix and network and learn more about our industry.
Perfect. Peter.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter Chave. I'm Principal Architect at Akamai Technologies in the Media Division. So my focus is on, Akamai is a global CDN platform. I focus on getting media flows through that CDN, particularly the ingest origin and out to end devices. My background is in broadcast television, so I come to this from a more traditional, I know what BNC cables are, for instance, and bringing that into the online world.
Perfect. So I think most of us, excuse me, standing on the sub-bass unit, but I can't hear when I stand at the podium, I can't hear what you're saying, so I've got to come around the front. So when we talk CDN, we often talk about falling prices, rising volumes of traffic. And I think as a sort of starting point, is that true this year as it has been? Is there anything different? Are we seeing traffic levels stabilizing? Are we seeing pricing stabilizing? So Peter, I'm going to start far end.
Absolutely. That's the interesting thing being in this market is every year we're kind of doubling our capacity while the prices are dropping, and part of that's kind of like a Moore's law trend of computing gets cheaper each year, but just the demands. What we find is this year's peak will be next year's steady state. It's just as more and more applications move online, as more and more people move from a traditional delivery of video, getting their video services through, say, a cable or a satellite provider, as more and more shifts to virtual MVPDs, these direct-to-consumer platforms, launch of new things like Disney+, HBO Max, etc. As more and more audience shifts there, the demands on the CDNs just increase. So, yeah, it's an interesting game where you have to, you have to sell it for less, but build more every year and try and keep up with that curve.
So, Neil, are you seeing the same?
Yeah, pretty much the same. I mean, we've been, every year we build out more capacity. We attain a high watermark traffic event, which blows us all away. And then 6 months later, we easily surpass that and we continue to build out. But I mean, the challenge, of course, is keeping ahead of the demand, making sure it's a quality product, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about that later, but many of the large broadcasters and content providers run a meritocracy. So, the better the quality, the more the opportunity you get to deliver of that, the higher the proportion of content. So it's balancing all of these, and as Peter says, it's really in a business where cost of goods are absolutely critical, every cent matters. It's making sure that you keep abreast of the latest hardware capabilities for the underlying servers, the networking technology, and of course software architectures. So it's juggling all of those, and in what continues to be a very, very exciting space.
George, are you seeing the same price compression and increasing traffic?
Absolutely, and I think Neil put a very interesting spin on the whole thing. Is specifically, in my opinion, there is a vertical and horizontal scaling. Horizontal, it's obvious when you have more customers, you're getting more bandwidth requirements. With scaling, we talk about increasing bit rates of each stream, and we're switching to 4K HDR, maybe 8K. We're definitely talking about vertical scaling, which is duplicating, triplicating the bandwidth requirements. Soon, hopefully, we'll have a demo page with all these different high bandwidth demo pages and streams that you'll be able to watch. But also the interesting part that does require new infrastructure. It does require scaling of infrastructure. But on one hand, it just, again, increasing number of lines. We're talking directly, working with telecom providers. On the other hand, we're talking about scaling it vertically. So one of our direction is to put highly scalable equipment. Like right now, we're talking with some vendors who are promising to provide, if not terabit per server actually, but we're talking about at least between half and a full terabit per server, which definitely makes a big difference. And it actually will allow us to scale up much more easily in a much more manageable fashion.
And Matt, your delivery model is possibly slightly different from these guys, but are you seeing the same traffic increases, price compression?
Generally on trend, I'd agree. And our model is different. Comcast has its own CDN that reaches our footprint in between 30 and 40% of the U.S. And then we partner with some of these folks here on the panel to help our customers reach a larger footprint, not only in the U.S. but globally as well. But trends are on the mark.
Okay, and I'm going to bounce the next question to you, actually, Matt, and go that way across the panel. So, quality. What's the story with quality on CDNs? Are you hitting the quality metrics that you're hoping to hit, or are you still working to achieve those quality levels? Where's this quality story at in the QoE experience?
It's an evolving process. You're always challenging yourself to do better. You're never going to hit 100%. You're never going to start as quickly as you'd like. So, yes, it's almost like what's the acronym I'm looking for? Your measurables, your KPIs and things like that. So, you set a goal quarter to quarter, year to year to say, we want video starts to be this percentage better than they were last year. And we're on track with those, and we're on track with delivering, with a number of failed starts lowering and lowering. So it's a continual process, but when you're always evaluating that. Like I say, you're never going to be 100%. If you are, you're not doing something right. So you could ask that question next year and it'll be the same thing, right? We're always looking to improve, and as some of these folks have said, we do have technological advances that help move those metrics up. So maybe the delta between perfect and where you're at is smaller. But it's a continual process.
George, any comments on QoE and quality?
Yeah, I think it's a very complicated question, actually, at least in my opinion, because we're dealing and we see how other companies are dealing with a lot of different players, with a lot of different devices, with a lot of updates on annual or bit of whatever basis, and it makes everything much more difficult. Whatever was working well 2 months ago may but may not work as well as 2 months from now. And nothing was changed on the server side or on the CDN side, but still there are changes. So how are we going to measure all the qualities here, especially when we talk about everything changes, codec changing. Again, startup time is a very critical component, obviously, for CDN, but there are a lot of components which are beyond CDN. Again, it would be codec specifically which will be used, it will be players that will be specifically used. So again, my point, it's too complicated, but what you can do to fix it, and probably hopefully we'll cover that subject later on, but in our opinion, the only way to do that, it's a multi-CDN solution where the player will be choosing the best CDN available at any point of time. And at least this is a way how to work with multiple platforms, multiple locations, multiple codecs, multiple bit rates, and all this. I don't want to call it a big mess. It's actually not a big mess. It's a big and interesting systems, but I think this is the only way. Try to do the best, unless you're working with a very controlled environment, like set-top boxes on a closed network or something like that.
Oh, Matt's got a finger up there.
Quick
Yeah.
follow-up, I'd say another key element in measuring your performance is using not just your tools, but third-party tools as well. Mm-hmm. So it's very important to look at some of the industry standard tools that are in use out there to keep your numbers honest and to make sure that you're not missing something or you have additional data sets to work with as well.
And that landscape's changed a little bit, hasn't it? Because
It
Sodexis
has.
is now moved into, I can't remember what happened with Sodexis, but the measurement that Sodexis are offering changed, didn't it?
Yep, it has, but Mux and NPA and
There's a period.
Kadiva and Deliver have good tool sets. They're just a few names. There are more, but absolutely relevant.
Cool. Neil?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things is understanding what quality metrics really matter, especially in the multi-CDN space. It's really understanding what's important to the broadcaster or the CP. So even if one's own metrics look really good, that doesn't matter if the KPIs that the client is reporting is something different. So in many respects, it's not really gaming the system, but it's really understanding what you need to do as a CDN, in order to maximize your share of that content. As George says, that things are changing on a very regular basis, so it's really keeping abreast of that, and it's constant catch up in many respects.
Yeah, Peter, quality?
Yeah, it's critical, and the CDN, I think you had this in your blurb, is when we work, nobody cares. But when we fail,
Everyone talks
about it. But a lot of times it's not even you can be the best deliverer, you could be delivering the segments of video at the right time with the right manifest, but it could be, you've got to look at the whole thing holistically, which is everything from your user's journey into their experience. If they're coming to a web page, where's that web page being served? What are the APIs that support that? Are they all secured behind the same kind of infrastructure? In a multi-CDN architecture, is everything being fed through that same matrix, or is there a single point of failure? A point example recently, auth services going down that cause you to not even get to the content. Content plays fine if you can get to the actual page with the content on it. So quality, and you're always judged by your last event. We did a very big soccer tournament, and we had 100% ingest, no ingest errors whatsoever. So next time, 100% is the high watermark. It has to work perfectly. So it's a continuous evolution. You have to keep checking yourself. We use a variety of tools, not just our own. We use a lot of other metrics from third parties to try and pull together the most coherent picture and then provide our data in real time back to customers to help make that decision. It's an arms race, continuous one. It'll be very hard to... it's part of the fun of this challenge.
So it's at least good enough or nearly good enough as a general comment on the state of the CDN industry, but there's always more to do. Is that a good summation?
To George's point, though, you could be perfect today, but then Apple drop a new iOS version that has some quirk in it that causes some timeout, or there's a new Roku version that does something slightly different with the stream, which means you did everything fine yesterday, but it doesn't work tomorrow. So you have to look at, again, 360 all the way around the ecosystem.
Well, and you can't discount real-world scenarios where a node on anyone's network could go down in a particular metro that when your routing's going through there, that's going to affect a whole bunch of users. So you have to be able to react in real time, reroute, use other nodes, redistribute that load. And I think everyone up here does it well, but that's, like you say, or someone just said, today you're fine. Tomorrow there's outages in Kansas City and Seattle. What do you do about that?
So, traffic scale. Let's just talk a little bit about where we're at with traffic scale. I gathered some sort of pointers and questions from you all before the session, and there's a very interesting one here that CDN traffic continues to double every 2 years. How are we going to serve everyone? I think that's a great question. So, Peter, I'm going to start.
I think that dovetails back into the question before last, which is, we continue to build out capacity, but as well as building out capacity, a lot of it's about rewriting the software to be smarter, because as a CDN provider, we're always building to peak. But a lot of times we're at average or below peak, so it's being able to scale, being able to have that network scalable enough so we're not burning the power, for one. We doubled our network last year, but only increased our power bill by 4%. And part of the way we did that was not just by better NIC cards or better servers that have more efficient power supplies. It's having really good software that would scale back the CPU cores, scale back the go into sleep states and things, so that the machines are always optimized to be ready for that at that time. But again, it's building out capacity, it's trying to find smarter ways to build capacity. It's building dedicated bandwidth, taking advantage of new undersea cables that come up to connect different regions, so we don't have to go through as many hops to kind of keep increasing capacity without having to burn all these like mid-tier nodes and things. So it's again, part of the challenge of trying to meet these capacity demands where, like when you have major streaming events going on, and then Fortnite does Chapter 2 updates, and suddenly you've got 50 terabits of traffic show up all in a couple of hours. Everyone tries to download a new game. So that's a real big juggling act.
Hopefully you get an email.
Sometimes you do.
We didn't know about that before it hit.
So, Neil,
I think
what about you guys? How are you going to?
Yeah, I think Peter made a really good point. The winner in this market, certainly from a cost perspective, is the organization that can figure out how to fill in, the valleys. Yeah. Because building for the peaks is a very, very costly proposition. The traffic levels in Chicago and London and Paris and Frankfurt, great, but if you build out to maximize those demands, what do you do in periods where you've got massive amounts of capacity that's largely unused? So as much as it's a capacity challenge, I think it's probably more of a traffic engineering challenge. And for those software updates that don't have to be served, by the nearest POP and where latency is not quite such a critical KPI, it's maybe serving that from a location that has more capacity. So it's really being sort of having that level of intelligence that I think is going to really help all of our organizations scale.
And George, in Tulix, how are you finding your capacity planning?
Yeah, we have a very interesting approach, maybe a little bit different from a lot of other CDNs. There was I think, pretty interesting articles a couple of years ago in Streaming Media Magazine about our approach, which actually it's not the only approach. We have a hybrid approach. But specifically, what we're doing, a lot of our traffic comes out from our main POP in Atlanta. We're in process of building multi-terabit POP in Atlanta right now with equipment, and equipment includes multiple stages, including obviously network stage or network equipment, which is very important to evaluate. It takes sometimes very long time to evaluate and choose the one which is capable. So right now we're talking about 50 terabit capable of equipment. Doesn't mean that we'll start obviously with the traffic right away. For more than 10 years, on the other hand, Tulix been utilized routing optimized network. This is how we got to the live streaming services very quickly, because again, more than 10 years we've been using a real-time routing optimizer, which were optimizing all the live streams coming out again from Atlanta, Georgia. And what's the latest project? So the question was about doubling or tripling the capacity. On one hand, we don't have that much traffic, unlike bigger CDNs, obviously, than us. But on the other hand, what our approach is, obviously, is adding more telecom providers. But on the other hand, from software and hardware point of view, we're talking about specialized hardware. We're talking sometimes FPGA-based hardware, which allows us to, to go beyond half terabit per one new server. We talked about, looks like Peter was talking about the power consumption. So we're talking about 120 watts maybe, which will generate half a terabit of traffic. This is, I think, pretty good number. And this is what we're dealing with, actually. And this is our focus, how cost effectively from all points of view, not only obviously from power point of view, but from the point of view of size, from the point of view of maintenance, from the point of view of how much engineers do you have to optimize software-based solution versus when you have a FPGA solution, you can just plug and play. But this is our approach, vertical scaling. As much as possible, vertical scaling, which requires, in our opinion, less support, less management, less troubleshooting. It's much easier to do.
And Matt, you've got an unusual architecture in some ways compared to these guys, because you've got a big legacy footprint here in North America, but you're also building out new infrastructure in Europe and so on to deal with Sky and other properties out there. So presumably you're almost operating your own hybrid CDNs internally, or I'm assuming there. But.
Yeah, I'm not privy to a lot of that, so I can't touch on it too much. But I know that there are that we're looking at the Comcast footprint and our complementary public presence, and then what Sky's doing there, and what that long-term plan looks like. That's about the extent of it. I know about it, though.
Okay, cool. So. But I'm going to carry on actually on one of the themes there. Talking to publishers in the audience and watching online, the strategy of using multi-CDN, how do you guys view that as a whole picture? Matt, you mentioned this in some of our preamble discussions and so on.
Yeah, I think it's, in today's world, it's a no-brainer. If you're offering any kind of content at scale, you have to have a multi-CDN approach. You have to have the right tooling so that you understand how you're balancing that traffic and how it's performing. You can pick your providers. I mean, you can use 2 CDNs, you can use 4. Really just depends on how much you know about where you're distributing, what your audience is going to look like, when they're going to consume the content. I think Peter touched on the fact that, do you know that you're going to go from a blip and a couple megabits per second to, a spike of 25 or 50 terabit. It really just depends on what you're planning for. If you're planning for an event like the Olympics or like the World Cup or the Super Bowl, mileage is going to vary greatly versus I'm going to roll out a catalog of 100 titles and put them out here. And it also goes into how you promote the content. So there's a lot of variables that inform how we work with our customers to kind of coach them and be their trusted advisor to tell them how they want to deploy this content. But multi-CDN is table stakes.
George, multi-CDN thoughts?
Oh, multi-CDN for us, it's kind of life and death scenario. For us, multi-CDN is a very important, it's a key component. So it's not like kind of add-on or something optional. This is what's the foundation of our actually main systems are. Specifically, I did mention that we're building custom CDNs. So custom CDNs, we're putting high performance hardware components just in several locations. So we cannot put like in 1,000 locations for multiple reasons, and it's cost-wise it will be would make sense, at least in my opinion. So we're talking about again just so limited number of locations, high performance hardware, software solutions, which covers very cost effectively traffic up to some point. What's after that? After that, you have to utilize alternative CDNs in case of spikes, or in case if you have to cover some locations when those locations are not covering. Especially we see that with our, actually we did first our 4K HDR solution, complete solution with multiple apps and including smart TVs and everything last year. And we've been using 2 CDNs. It's our own and level 3 CDN in that case. Our bit rate was 15 to 22 megabits per second. And we saw in many cases traffic was going to level 3. Why? Because this is the whole reason for multi-CDN, is to cover those areas where our or some CDNs cannot cover. So like I said, it's a foundation of ours. So it's not an option. This is what our main product is.
Neil?
Yeah, it's a way of life. I think there was a time when, probably 5 years ago, when the major CDN providers were trying to fight it, but by putting as much workflow into the CDNs as possible and making it very difficult for the publishers and the content providers to split traffic, just because of workflow complexities and deltas between the services from different CDNs. But today, I think yes, certainly it's a way of life. However, we all get fixated on the largest publishers and content providers around the world, but there is a whole segment of the market, the medium and the smaller publishers that don't need or want multi-CDN, that are happy to hand off certain aspects of their workflow, whether it's packaging or DRM or ad insertion, to the CDN providers, and those markets I think are still served very well in a single CDN use case.
Peter?
Yeah, to echo Neil's comments, it's a way of life. And to echo Matt, it's for big events, you want to hedge everything you possibly can. What we see people do is when you do a multi-CDN solution is make sure that the thing that's doing your multi-CDN selecting is not a single source of failure. Because the reason you're choosing multi-CDNs is you don't have a single point of failure in the system. And interestingly, part of our architecture is, everyone thinks of Akamai as this giant monolithic CDN. It's actually, we are several hundred small CDNs or maps of CDNs that actually exist independently. So this is something we've been very familiar with for a long time in terms of how you make the right decisions about which network to use at a certain time. Because in any one area, in Kansas, you may find this CDN is performing really great because there's free capacity, there's a really good line into that city right now, whereas the other CDNs in that city are all overloaded because there's something else going on, or they just have limited capacity. Especially when you go internationally, if you look at like LATAM, Asia, Africa, and in APJ, there are hotspots where some providers have much better capacity, they have maybe better ISP relationships, they have better undersea cable connections into those particular regions. So when you're making a when you're trying to choose between them, a lot of it comes down to having the right metrics and KPIs to make the right decision, because it sometimes the data can skew one way or another, and when you actually do the analysis, it's like, well, it wasn't actually any better on this one versus this one. It just happened to be there was a slightly better performing link here, or that object happened to be like 2 milliseconds closer.
Oh, yes, it would be unheard of a CDN to game the old switches, wouldn't it? So
there's a lot in that decision process to make sure that you, as you deploy that, make sure you don't create another. Just because you abstract it a layer, you don't create another layer of problems in solving that one problem.
So a few years ago, I did a bit of research marrying up mergers and acquisitions in the CDN space over telco capacity increases. And it was interesting. It's about an 18-month lag from when major intercontinental fibers were lit up, and that about 18 months later, almost every time there's a period of consolidation, probably driven by price dropping and so on. But I think that price dropping's, it may still logarithmically be technically reducing, but I think it's kind of stabilizing to a greater or lesser extent, which says to me that the CDNs are having to diversify much more, which is also in the media space, particularly with the streaming media hat on. That's kind of conflicts with the fact that everything in the streaming space is consolidated onto HTTP. So CDNs are diversifying in other ways. Within the scope of streaming, how are you guys diversifying and innovating to add new features? Or are you actually trying to reduce that and drive everyone into vanilla HTTP streaming? So Peter, I'm going to start with you.
And that's part of the challenge in a multi-CDN world, actually, is that if you want to have 4 providers, you've got to make sure they all have the same feature set. So part of the challenge as a CDN, as an innovator, is to come up with features that everyone else can either take advantage of from you individually, to, if other people don't have it, it's not something that, if nobody else has it, is no use, because then what's the point of me putting that feature into my network? A lot of the stuff that we've been working on is now more and more people are showing up for OTT services, that this is now the primary consumption vehicle for a lot of consumers, and that now more and more content rights holders are putting their content in this basket, is protecting that content, not only from just string piracy, but protecting all of the APIs around that, protecting the interface of how you get to the content, so things like credential stuffing, people stealing passwords or using these rainbow lists to try and hack your accounts to take over your services. So a lot of the innovation we've been doing is around, now that people are showing up and the ad dollars and the revenues are all flowing onto these systems, it's now critically important that they're protected and looked after.
Neil, differentiation.
Yeah, I mean, the first and foremost is just trying to make sure that we have a seat at the table. So make the product simple to consume, make it available to developers, rich set of APIs, good documentation, good SDKs. And as Peter said, it's really important to protect that content. And we're looking not necessarily at integrating things like watermarking solutions, but having the capability so that the content provider can add that capability via API. So we're looking at function as a service, a technology called edge functions, which would enable a content provider to bring their own solutions, whether it's server-side ad insertion, whether it's watermarking or DRM capability, manifest manipulation. It's really having those capabilities so that a customer can define their custom media workflows without sort of locking them into, in my case, the Limelight solution. But I think I speak for
Yes,
all of us. We want to keep it open.
We were just talking in the microservices panel about how far in the future we might see a microservices app market appearing.
Right.
But I think there's a lot of standards to be developed for that. George, any thoughts about differentiation?
Yeah, for us, it's an easy question because we're very different. We're not clearly just a CDN provider. We also developing application, managing CDNs, managing mostly everything what's streaming related stuff. And we're small, and this being small, actually much smaller than my colleagues here, the companies that they represent, and actually there is some advantage of being independent. And when we talk about multi-CDN solution, imagine one big CDN trying to implement another big CDN as a multi-CDN solution. Could be conflict of a lot of interest and a lot of other things. For us, again, it's a natural thing. You're grabbing your CDN, you're grabbing a couple big CDNs, and without any hesitation, let's say, from any points of view. And I think it's natural, again, for us. And I think we'll be covering some other areas, but for us, they're constantly, for what we're doing, actually, we have a big package of other software, of other solutions or offerings, and we're slowly moving them more and more into CDN solutions. So our customers are getting not only HTTP-based, let's say, caching services, which could be very intelligent to some degree, and so on and so on. But, for example, we're talking about DRM. We specifically certified our company to start with wide ones to start with. And because of the pricing models that we're getting, and everyone else is getting from Google at this point of time, it probably will be our default DRM solution. Default, which we had no additional cost. Why? Because it's easy for us, and it increases value, actually, obviously, for our customers. And on the other hand, it's always pros and cons. When you talk about one CDN, which is a very specific CDN with very specific features, it could be very good, but then it's a problem once you talk about multi-CDN, then what are you going to do? That you're losing all the features, or you're tied up with that specific CDN so that you cannot use any other ones. Our approach to have a very generic, obviously as much as possible feature rich, but very generic feature set, so that at any point of time we can switch from one CDN to another and so on, or a completely custom solution. So what about additional features? And I think we'll be covering more about this stuff, but there are multiple other features that I think CDN providers are working with, and us as well.
Okay, perfect. And before I ask Matt, I'm going to come to you guys for questions in a second. So start thinking. Matt, differentiation in the CDN space. Any thoughts?
Not as critical for us as the rest of these folks up here, because it's a complementary service. We're happy to help our customers do that, but for us, it's more about the suite of products and solutions that we have across the board, from channel origination to delivery to VOD syndication and content management. So since it's not a core, at the core of what we do, I'd say it's a little bit different.
Sure. Okay, questions from the floor. Any questions, guys? Oh, they're all going sleepy. There we go.
Thanks. So with 5G coming down the road, I know it's a little ways out, but what keeps you guys up at night, and how do you rationalize the cost that I would assume will increase quite a bit if you're going to be at the extreme edge of the network?
5G really doesn't cause me to lose much sleep until we find out what's going to happen with the C-band. 5G is a point-to-point technology that requires that you can see line of sight to the next tower, and then to get it into the home, you've got to slap an antenna onto the window because it can't penetrate glass, and then you've got to figure out how to distribute it in the home. So until we find out what the FCC wants to do with the C-band spectrum, they've said they're going a certain way. That's not something I think that makes me lose sleep at night, but we'll wait and see where things develop.
I'm kind of dying to straw poll the audience on that, actually. Does anyone, show of hands, okay, who thinks that 5G is going to make a significant difference to the streaming industry? Okay, and those who don't? Okay, interesting. There's going to be a bit of food for thought for you. Further comments here,
Yeah,
Judge?
regarding 5G, I think it will be, in my opinion, it will have a huge impact on the CDN business. Instead of talking about doubling every year, we probably will be, tenfold increase, if not more. At least it's in my opinion. Plus, if by any chance this C-band will be, I don't want to call it eliminated, but let's say we'll have difficulties continue functioning the way how it is frequency-wise, then it's again, we're already having lineup of customers who are trying to find an alternative for a C-band-based distribution and switch it to IP-based distribution. And we're talking about huge amount of traffic. Again, we're talking about terabits of traffic here, but this on business to be a B2B environment. Now, from 5G point of view, I think with 5G, and I had a presentation last year regarding that, I'm expecting to have eSIM-based systems, like electronic SIM card-based systems, which will be implemented in almost all devices. It will be refrigerators, it will be whatever, which will require a lot of traffic, including video traffic. It's like, let's say you're purchasing a new refrigerator, and you have a screen on it, and instead of reading manual, just hit the button, and you'll see like operator's manual in a video format. Can you do it now? Yes, potentially you can, but it will be much more easier with 5G, with the bandwidth, with the throughput and everything. So I think it will be a huge impact, in my opinion, the switching to 5G.
Yeah?
Be patient, though.
No? Any thoughts on
Few
5G?
years away.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Peter?
It's,
A few.
It's what 5G is. It's an access network technology. So, in the same way that we went through when high-speed broadband went into homes, it's like, oh, this is going to change the whole business. No, it just drove up demand for services because suddenly there's more capacity to get more content. So the imbalance between the edge and the core is just going to increase further, which the imbalance between the core data centers where content lives or services come from and the edge where customers are served from, if that increases, it just requires more CDN layer and technologies to actually bridge that and try and scale that out.
Being heretical, if I can get a perfectly good video picture on 4G, what am I going to get by going to 5G apart from slightly lower latency?
Right. And so some of these arguments assume that means that we're automatically going to shift the
I don't want a
content,
4K
the
picture
quality
on this, I really don't.
But you're going to hear that.
Yeah.
That's what's going to happen. And let's all not forget what happened with the first advent of this guy, where we were dealing with flash and it was melting the battery. Melting meaning running it down very quickly. We're going to repeat some of that.
Any more
I think
questions from the...
It might be.
Sorry, Neil.
It may be that it's just we're thinking about it from a US perspective, but in other parts of the world that are not so well connected from a fixed wire perspective, that we might see 5G penetration and usage patterns for video and other media really change the way that folks are consuming video, but maybe not so much from the US short term.
I'll echo that to Neil, because a lot of the regions we work in are mobile-first countries. So take India, for example. Everyone watches the cricket on their phones. So we have to deal with flash crowds of millions of users showing up to watch the IPL, which is more important than life itself.
I have a feeling that's going to be a debate that's going to go on. I hope it replaces the low latency one. Any other questions from the floor? Oh, Nadine's got her hand up.
Hi there. I got here a little late, but I wanted to ask, did you guys talk about ATSC 3.0, or is it something that you're integrating into your business that you want to discuss?
So if you didn't get that, guys, ATSC 3.0. Anything? Go on, Neil. Go on, Peter, sorry.
Maybe vested interest, having gone through ATSC 1.0 in exquisite detail the first time. I think there's a challenge that's going to happen with ATSC 3.0, which didn't happen with ATSC 1, which is ATSC 1.0 was mandated federally, at least in the US. So that was the digitalization, switching off the analog, moving to digital. ATSC 3.0 is not a mandated change. It's an opportunity for the local broadcast markets to increase their spectrum, shift up from an MPEG-2 codec, which they're locked in now, to HEVC, move from MPEG transport stream as the bearer to dash manifest and to an IP bearer. So there's a lot of really good work there, but it's still relying on people to have antennas on their homes, which the penetration is, 10 to 12%. So, and the main reason people are switching, or want to switch is to consolidate stations, not to increase capacity right now, because they want to be able to sell off the other spectrum to the 5G network. So I think there's going to be a really interesting fight between the capacity that's available on ATSC 3 as a broadcast, carrying 62 miles to the horizon from any one particular metal tower, and between this, steerable traffic coming off a 5G tower, which can give you 10 gigabits to your one device if you're within line of sight without glass in the way.
The other thing, I agree with everything Peter said. The other thing I'd point to is there isn't consistency among the broadcast groups, especially here in North America. You've got Pearl and you've got the ATSC3 crowd. Essentially they're giant broadcast conglomerates who don't necessarily agree on the implementation. And that's key to getting broad adoption.
Yeah, just talking from the micro scale in the UK, the DTG's debook standard stuff is, everyone's followed the spec, but one group's implemented with capital HTTP, one group's implemented with lowercase HTTP, and you brick the box if you send the wrong stream to the wrong box. Yeah, they're standards compliant, but there's a lot to do, I think, in that space. Just to comment, I'm talking a little bit about ATSC3 and 5G, but specifically the multicast capabilities of them in my session tomorrow, Nadine, so you might find that interesting. So last question, well, unless there's another question from the floor. I don't want to cut you guys off. Okay, so last kind of question. Looking into 2020 and beyond, what are the big changes coming up? I've purposely kept the session reasonably non-technical so far, so feel free to dive into tech and look at SRT or RIST or whatever it may be, or into edge computing, but what do you think the big changes in your business environments are going to be? Yeah,
you mentioned one that I think we believe in a great deal. So reliable UDP, I think Neil and Peter would agree, has really improved how we get our customers' content into our networks to help deliver it. So whether you like SRT or whether you like Zixi or whatever flavor that you care for, it's been a very key enabler to get good broadcast signals as close as we can to real time into the network. SRT being open source, we think, is going to even help advance that even further. We've had our customers asking for it already for months and months, and so I think in 2021, or golly, that'd be a long way away. 2020 is somewhere we're looking for SRT to play a significant part in our workflow and our customers too.
Interesting. George?
Tulix has a so-called hybrid environment where we have our own infrastructure, as well as obviously we're using some resources from the cloud providers where we need it. But because of the nature of experience of people that we have in a company and our history, very often we represent like a multimedia hub specifically. On the ingest side, we're utilizing multiple protocols. We're utilizing the same with BSRT recently, obviously, ZXI. We're putting fiber if we have to. I mean, it's impossible probably to put, not probably for sure, put to the cloud, but we have some customers have direct fiber connectivity to our multimedia hub. Now, what are we calling multimedia hub? Because, okay, you can ingest with all these multiple protocols, you're doing forward correction or direct fiber waves, optical waves, or some even unknown protocols, because we have some vendors who utilize their own, I wouldn't say proprietary, but less known for their correction protocols. It's on the ingest side. On the other hand, we, on the edge services side, it's not only HTTP protocols that we're providing as the output. Very often we're sending, let's say, to satellite companies, we're sending to another OTT providers, single bitrate, it could not single bitrate, but I'm talking single stream. And obviously it cannot be in many cases HTTP-based protocol like Dash and HLS or CMF. What we are doing in this case, again, it's going out depending on what's required. And again, it's the same actually suite of protocol. The only exception, so far we don't have any customer who bring content with optics and going out with the optics, because kind of probably that makes sense. But otherwise, yes, we have obviously facilities which allows you to convert all these protocols from one another and encode, and we're working with all the major encoding providers, multiple providers, to do the encoding based on the features that our customer needs. So yes, we do, and this is actually probably will increase in 2020, because, and one of the biggest actually changes that we see, it's more and more OTT providers all over the world, and they do require this distribution of the channels on one hand. On the other hand, and I did mention the C-band and all the changes that we're expecting, a lot of content which is being delivered to affiliates, even within US over satellite, they're switching to IP-based solutions. And again, we are one of the most probably convenient spot to do that, because we can do all the conversions and we can do all the protocols and formats to deliver. So, yes, thank you.
Neil?
Well, 2020 being an even year is good for CDNs in general. I think that we'll see more and a ramp up of existing direct-to-consumer services, so more OTT. So that for us is means more investment in capacity and scale. So that's table stakes for 2020. I think we're seeing continued need from the content providers and content rights holders around visibility and transparency of the service, broadcast hardening, for want of a better term. Peter's been in that space, he knows it very well, what it means. I think we're going to continue to see more developer DevOps requirements from the CDN, making the CDN, if you will, more of a CI/CD workflow. So they're going to continue to work there. And then we can't ignore, we were talking about it this morning on the live streaming for sports, more social, more immersive experience. So that's like, how do we integrate with social, and what does that mean from a low latency streaming and ultra low latency streaming where applicable?
Damn, we nearly got through the whole panel without mentioning low latency.
And yeah, how all this fits in with the idea of sports gambling, in the US moving forward. So I think there's a lot of really exciting things in 2020.
Good time, Peter.
Yeah, 2020 is one of those years that we've always talked about. What's going to happen in 2020 and all these predictions for 2020 and all these targets we're going to reach by 2020. But I'd like to echo, I think you covered most of them there, Neil. So
Sorry.
That's fine. DevOps is certainly critical, and allowing customers not only the real-time insights to be able to actually go in and make their own reservations, to be able to change their capacity targets in real time to adjust to their demands. That's something we see as critical. I think 2020 we're going to see because it's a marquee year for sports. We've got Tokyo, we have the usual big football games, American football games that happen that year. And we've seen a ramp up of 4K HDR production towards the end of this year here in North America. There's been quite a bit in Europe, but it's been on the traditional platforms. I think OTT 4K HDR will break out in 2020. I think we're going to see a lot of big events, and that's going to drive new demands and new requirements onto the network. I think CMAF, has come of age in terms of, if you look at the ecosystem, 97% of Apple devices support it, 99.3% of Android active daily users all support CMAF. So the time is now for that. If you're not encrypting, you should have changed already. If you are encrypting, within the next 12 months, I think we passed the critical point where it makes sense to move to that if you haven't already. So I think it'll be the year of CMAF, hopefully. I'd like to say we finally fix ad insertion online and improve our fill rates from the meager 20, 30% territory it is. But I think there's structural changes that need to happen in the back end. So I'll keep making my prediction that ad insertion will get better. But I'll come back to you next year and I'll make the same prediction. 2021.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to thank the panel. A round of applause, please.
Thank you.
And before you go running off, there's a happy hour, drinks hour, just to get you all drunk before the last sessions of the day. Hooray. Now, next in the exhibition hall. And if you want to hear more on the network distribution side, I'm talking about multicasting at 11:30 tomorrow.
Thank you.